Port Stephens Council is a local government area in the Hunter region of New South Wales, Australia. The area is just north of Newcastle and is adjacent to the Pacific Highway, which runs through Raymond Terrace, the largest town and council seat. The area is named after Port Stephens, which is the major geographical feature of the area. It extends generally from the Hunter River in the south, to near Clarence Town in the north, and from the Tasman Sea in the east, to just south of Patterson in the west. The mayor of Port Stephens Council is Ryan Palmer. Palmer was caught in a major scandal in 2022 following the purchase of an $86,000 Ford Ranger for mayoral and personal use. Port Stephens is about 2.5 hours north of Sydney. Early life. Port was born in Southend-on-Sea, Essex. When he was a year old, his family moved to Dagenham in East London, where he grew up and where his parents still live. He was described as being a loner and was often bullied at school during his childhood. Former teachers also described Port's personality as quiet. His neighbor described him as having a peculiar, childlike personality, exhibiting odd behavior as a grown man, such as playing with children's toys. After leaving school, aged 16, he went to art college, but it proved too expensive for his parents and he spent 2 years training as a chef instead. A former romantic partner of Port's described his personality as childish and gave that as the reason for ending their relationship. He came out as gay in his mid-20s. He lived with his parents until his early 30s, then lived alone in a flat in Barking, London, and worked as a chef at a stagecoach bus depot in West Ham. Port also briefly appeared on an episode of the television show MasterChef. He was described as having an athletic appearance at the time of the murders due to regularly going to the gym. He was bald, and disguised this in public by wearing a blonde toupee. The hairpiece was professionally fastened and increased his confidence when meeting other men. Victims. Port met his victims via online gay and bisexual social networks and dating or hookup apps and constructed biographies in which he made false claims about his background, including one in which he pretended to have graduated from Oxford University and served in the Royal Navy. In another he gave his occupation as a special needs teacher. Port used gamma-hydroxybutyric acid, a date rape drug, adding it to drinks given to his victims, raped them, and murdered 4 of them in his flat in Barking. The prosecution said post-mortem examinations on the 4 young men who died revealed that each had died from a drug overdose featuring high levels of GHB, but Port surreptitiously used other drugs on his victims: amyl nitrite, Viagra, mephedrine, and methamphetamine. Port contacted his first murder victim, Anthony Walgate, 23, a fashion student originally from Hull, who on occasion worked as an escort, on June 17, 2014, pretending to be a client and offered £800 for his services. They later met at Barking Station. At his flat, Port drugged Walgate with GHB and raped him. He died after Port gave him a fatal overdose of the drug. In the early morning of June 19, Port dragged the body to the pavement outside his flat and used his own mobile phone to call an ambulance. Not giving his name, he told an operator that he had been driving past and had seen a young boy who was collapsed or had had a seizure or was drunk on the street. Port then returned to his flat. Shortly before 8 a.m. Walgate was pronounced dead. Evidence linking Port to Walgate's death was missed at this time. Port was convicted of perverting the course of justice in March 2015 because his account of the death to the police varied. He was sentenced to 8 months, but was released in June and was electronically tagged. Between August 2014 and September 2015, Port murdered 3 more men: Gabriel Kovary, 22, who had moved to London from Slovakia and had briefly lived with Port; Daniel Whitworth, 21, from Gravesend in Kent, who worked as a chef; and Jack Taylor, 25, who lived with his parents in Dagenham, and worked as a forklift truck driver. The bodies of the second and third victims were found in the graveyard of the Church of St. Margaret of Antioch in Barking, by the same woman on separate occasions walking her dog. The last victim was found in the park adjacent to the graveyard. Port had planted a fake suicide note alongside the body of Whitworth that suggested he was responsible for the death of Covery, the previous victim, and that he had killed himself out of guilt. Port used a number of internet hookup sites and apps as a means of initially contacting his victims, including Sleepy Boy, Grindr, Hornet, Fit Lads, Badoo, Gaydar, Flirt, Daddy Hunt, Planet Romeo, Manhunt, Slavy Boys, and Couchsurfing. The families of the victims of Stephen Port were given compensation by the Metropolitan Police over the force's handling of the investigation into the killings. The Independent Office for Police Conduct re-investigated the Met over its initial handling of their cases. Inquests. The original inquests into the deaths returned open verdicts. Coroner Nadia Persad said she had some concerns surrounding Whitworth's death which have not been answered by the police investigation. Her statement continued, "Most concerning are the findings by the pathologist of manual handling prior to his death, and noted that the bed sheet that he was found wrapped in was not forensically analyzed, and the bottle of GBL which was found near him was also not tested for fingerprints or DNA." A detective was asked why the bed sheet had not been tested. Conviction and life sentence. In 2015, Port was charged with 4 counts of murder and 4 of administering a poison, but at the Old Bailey in June 2016 prosecutors added 6 more counts of administering a poison, 7 charges of rape and 4 of sexual assault. He also faced 4 alternative charges of manslaughter. Port appeared via videolink from home prison Belmarsh and denied all charges. On November 23, 2016, Port was convicted of the assaults by penetration, rapes, and murders of Anthony Walgate, 23, Gabriel Covery, 22, Daniel Whitworth, 21, and Jack Taylor, 25, as well as the rapes of 3 other men he drugged, and 10 counts of administering a substance with intent, and 4 sexual assaults. He was found guilty on all counts. In total, 11 men were known victims of Port's crimes. Commenting on the case, Malcolm McAfee, Deputy Chief Crown Prosecutor for CPS London, said over a period of 3 years the defendant committed a series of murders and serious sexual offences against young men. Port manipulated and controlled these men through the chilling and calculated use of the drug GHB, which he administered without their permission. This was a technically challenging case, complicated by a significant amount of evidence taken from the numerous social media sites Port used. At the Old Bailey on November 25, 2016, Mr. Justice Openshaw sentenced Port to life imprisonment with a whole life order. Port is incarcerated in HMP Belmarsh. Questions about the police investigation. The bodies of the 4 men were found in the vicinity of Port's flat, in a period of just over a year, from June 2014, Walgate outside his front door and the other 3 in or near a nearby graveyard. The Metropolitan Police, however, failed to link the deaths. The first 3 victims were initially thought not to have died in suspicious circumstances, and despite the Pink News website and the Force's LGBT Independent Advisory Group correctly believing there was a serial murderer at large, the police had told them the crimes were not linked. A BBC One documentary broadcast in March 2017 suggested a catalogue of police failings in the Met's response to the deaths. Crucial witnesses were not questioned, for example, Port's neighbor who had witnessed Port in a dazed state, with a large container full of white powder and bottles of clear liquid, when he made an unexpected visit to his home, and also reported receiving suspicious text messages from Port regarding Covery. Covery's previous landlord, John Papa, searched on the internet for other unexplained deaths in the Barking area, and was astonished at the similarities in the case of Anthony Walgate, especially the locations in which the bodies were found. However, Barking and Dagenham police did not link the two cases. Upon learning of Whitworth's death, he called the detective at Barking and Dagenham police and demanded to know whether they thought the now 3 cases were linked or could be murder. As he was concerned for his own personal safety, he was assured that they were not linked and not murder. He also offered to be interviewed since he felt he might have relevant information regarding Covery's last movements, but no one contacted him in response, even after he had organizations such as Pink News contact the police on his behalf. The woman who found Covery's body and found Whitworth's body 2 weeks later in the same location and almost exactly the same position, also reported thinking that Barking and Dagenham police had no idea what they were doing not to connect the two cases. Whitworth's stepmother says that when police informed her of his death, they led her to believe he had overdosed on drugs, despite no investigation having taken place, and discounted the bruising under his arms, which a coroner later stated meant that third-party involvement could not be ruled out. They took the supposed suicide note left with his body at face value, sending a small fragment to her and Whitworth's father, asking them to verify whether it was his handwriting. Although they said they were unsure, it was established at trial that Barking and Dagenham police had recorded this as confirmation it was Whitworth's handwriting, and that the police had not submitted the note for expert analysis. When the couple were later shown the complete document, Whitworth's father immediately commented that he saw nothing to indicate it had been written by his son. The couple had also asked whether the police had investigated who was meant by the guy I was with last night, and that the response was that it would never be possible to find out all the answers. Asking about challenging the open verdict or continuing the investigation, his stepmother encountered what she described as an attitude of "it is what it is, deal with it." Similarly, Taylor's sister reported the police simply telling the family Jack's dead and accepting the syringe in his pocket, white powder in his wallet and needle marks on his arm as indicating that he had sat down by himself and overdosed on drugs, although her brother was very anti-drugs. She and another sister contacted Barking and Dagenham police 11 days after his death for an update on their investigation and were astonished to discover none was taking place. They then researched for themselves and came across the 3 previous cases, but the police responded by denying there was any connection. Eventually, 2 weeks after his death, the police agreed to take the 2 sisters to where Taylor's body had been found, and at Barking Station, told them that CCTV footage of Taylor and another man had been found. The sisters were surprised not to have been notified, and more surprised to be told the police were not attempting to identify the other man. One described the attitude of the police as shocking. In response to their questioning the credibility of the police account of what the footage showed, a sergeant later contacted them to say that upon review, the footage did not show Taylor entering the churchyard alone. They then requested that images of the other man be made public in order to identify him. The police were reluctant, saying that they did not normally release CCTV images, but eventually gave in, and 2 days later Port was identified from the images and arrested. Following Port's conviction, the Independent Police Complaints Commission opened an investigation into whether 17 police officers should face disciplinary action. As of November 2017, this was expected to be completed in spring 2018, but not made public until after a verdict in a new joint inquest on all 4 deaths. The inquests on Covery and Whitworth were later quashed. The families have also opened a civil claim against the Metropolitan Police. The Metropolitan Police also reported in 2016 that they were re-examining 58 unexplained deaths involving date rape drugs, although a spokeswoman said there was nothing to suggest that Port was linked to any of them. Police identified Port as a significant witness subject to a rape allegation hours after his first victim was found dead. In June 2022, the Independent Office of Police Conduct reopened investigations into the way the deaths were handled due to alleged material flaws in its previous investigation. Port's GHB dealer. In 2019, Gerald Matavu, who was known to have supplied Port with the GHB used in the killings, was arrested and later convicted of the murder of actor and businessman Eric Michaels. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 31 years. Using similar methods to Port, Matavu had targeted Michaels on Grindr and had given him a fatal dose of GHB. Aftermath. In August 2018 it was revealed that Port had lodged an appeal against his murder convictions. In November 2018 it was announced that Port's appeal had been rejected. In August 2020, in a Brazilian chat show program, Que Historia é Essa? Porchat, hosted by Fabio Porchat, an audience member named Rafael told his story of dating Port. Rafael had moved to London in 2012 at 19 years old and had been working as a waiter when he met Port on a dating website. After they started dating, Rafael moved into Port's apartment, where they lived together for a little longer than a month. After they broke up, Rafael moved back to Brazil, where he got a different job and started another relationship. One day, he decided to search for Port's name online and found out about the murders through an article on BBC. Rafael said he first read the words documentary, Stephen Port and serial killer, and was interested since he thought Port had made a documentary on a serial killer, until he read it and realized what it was actually about. After he discovered the truth about Port, Rafael said that looking back, there are a lot of strange things going on. Another former partner of Port's also claimed to have broken up with Port due to his unusual behavior. In July 2020, it was announced that a fresh inquiry was set to take place in January 2021, to examine all 4 deaths and probe into any police failings.